Closed-door testimony. Democrats continue their impeachment investigation into President Donald Trump. How the White House is responding. Focus on America. Why some U.S. church leaders met with Pope Francis at the Vatican. Speaking out. Bishops in Texas make an appeal on behalf of a convicted murderer facing the death penalty. And changing attitudes. Analysis of a new study on cohabitation before marriage. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, November 7th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Democrats get ready to bring their impeachment inquiry into the public eye. Everything up until now has been behind closed doors, but that will change next week when witnesses will testify in front of cameras. Now, Democrats are releasing hundreds of pages of transcripts from their closed-door interviews with key witnesses. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with that story. Jason?
Wyatt, the Democrats' first witness will be the top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine. William Taylor told House investigators behind closed doors that he thought President Trump held up aid to Ukraine to force it to investigate 2016, as well as the Bidens. But Republicans say Taylor does not have firsthand information.
Out from these closed doors. Soon, Americans will hear directly from impeachment witnesses.
Those open hearings will be an opportunity for the American people to evaluate the witnesses for themselves, to make their own determinations about the credibility of the witnesses, but also to learn firsthand about the facts of the president's misconduct.
President Donald Trump says he did nothing wrong, and GOP senators challenge the impeachment investigation.
It's a sham. It's been driven by political people. The best way to deal with a president is at the ballot box. You can do it one of two ways. You can have 535 people decide who should be president, or you can have 130 million. We're less than a year away.
Some Republicans say it's time to out the whistleblower, the person who first complained about the president urging Ukraine to investigate the Bidens.
The whistleblower needs to come before Congress as a material witness because he worked for Joe Biden at the same time Hunter Biden was getting money from corrupt oligarchs. I say tonight to the media, do your job and print his name.
Democrats call that dangerous.
The whistleblower statute is there to make sure that there is an honest transparency and openness in our government, and so that people who witness something have at least some protection to step forward and speak out. This notion that this person should be brought before the American people now, publicly disclosed and punished, and that's what's really behind it all, is just the exact opposite of what we expect in a democracy.
Today, House investigators questioned aide to Vice President Mike Pence. She listened into that phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason. President Trump pushes back against a report he wanted Attorney General William Barr to clear his name of wrongdoing. The Washington Post reports the president wanted Barr to hold a press conference and declare no law was broken during the president's phone call with the president of Ukraine. The president calls the story fiction and fake news. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Today, the White House said the Department of Justice already cleared the president's name by reviewing this call at the center of the impeachment inquiry, and the president says there was no need for a press conference.
The Washington Post reports President Trump wanted Attorney General William Barr to hold a news conference around September 25th, the same time the transcript of the call between President Trump and Ukraine's president was released. Regarding the Washington Post report, the president tweeted, "Another fake news story without any sources, pure fiction, about Bill Barr and myself. We both deny this story, which they knew before they wrote it. A garbage newspaper."
So good afternoon. And
Even though the Attorney General did not hold the news conference, the Department of Justice publicly announced that criminal division prosecutors found no wrongdoing by the president. We asked the counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, what guidance the president gave Attorney General William Barr leading up to the impeachment investigation.
I have no idea, except that the Department of Justice already clearly stated that their criminal division looked at the call and decided not to pursue further investigation. They saw no campaign finance violation. The president has denied.
The phone call at the center of the impeachment probe reveals the president encouraged Ukraine to investigate his biggest political rival. But the president says it clears his name. He He tweets, "Read the transcript." Vice President Mike Pence was asked about the impeachment probe after filing re-election paperwork in New Hampshire.
You know, the American people have the transcript of the president's call, and they can see there was no quid pro quo, and the president did nothing wrong.
President Trump also says there's no quid pro quo involving military aid, although some witnesses in this probe have testified it was their understanding Ukraine would not receive military aid unless it met the president's demands. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Kentucky Democrat Andy Beshear says he is ready to start his transition to become the state's governor.
It ended, and it's time to move forward with a smooth transition.
Beshear leads by about 5,000 votes, but incumbent Matt Bevin has not conceded. The pro-life Republican has asked for recanvassing of Tuesday's vote count. He says he's prepared to file several other legal challenges. Funerals began today for the 9 American women and children killed in an ambush in Mexico. Mexican soldiers are guarding the entrance to the town of La Mora as hundreds of mourners begin to arrive. Some of the cars had U.S. license plates from as far away as North Dakota. Around 1,000 people are expected for the services. Mexican officials believe the ambush was part of a fight between rival drug cartels. The former Speaker of the House of Commons says Britain will suffer in trade and global standing if it leaves the European Union.
Should the UK not be bound by the 2016 referendum? My simple answer is no, it's not bound by the 2016 referendum.
John Bercow also says he would be in favor of another vote next year on whether to leave the EU. He stepped down as a member of Parliament after 22 years. He served as Speaker for a decade. The United Kingdom is preparing for a general election next month. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a visit to U.S. military personnel in Germany. Pompeo plans to visit a total of 5 German cities during his trip. Today, he observed a live fire exercise. Later in his tour, he will deliver a speech highlighting the role of the U.S. in helping Eastern and Central Europe defeat communism. Also in Germany, an escape tunnel underneath the Berlin Wall has been opened to the public for the first time. It's part of the 30th anniversary of the opening of the East Germany's border. The tunnel is roughly 100 yards long. Work on it began after communist East Germany sealed its border. It was built by a group who had escaped to West Germany. Church leaders from the United States have begun a series of meetings with Pope Francis at the Vatican. Over the next 10 weeks, American church leaders will meet with the Holy Father. Every 5 years, he and the bishops discuss the state of the church in the U.S. Rome Bureau Chief Alan Holdren sat down with Bishop Robert Reed from Boston, who met with the Holy Father today.
No surprise, when we sat down with the Pope, it was very much a dialogue, an encounter with him. He listened very carefully to the questions and the comments that we made, and he, in answering or attempting to answer our questions, told many stories from his past that were his way of illustrating how he felt and his affection for us and his desire to encourage us.
And I understand that each of the bishops, you and 14 others, had the opportunity to sort of come up with a question that you would ask. Did you ask a question of the Holy Father?
I did, as a matter of fact. I spoke to him about the struggle that we face in the United States right now, like many parts of Europe and parts of the world, this increasing degree of secularization. And I told him about how sad that makes me feel, because my faith is so important to my life, my growth, my present, my priesthood, my Catholicism. And it makes me so sad to see people not just rejecting the practice of their faith and organized religion, but also rejecting God himself, their belief, giving up their belief. So I asked him, I said, beyond being just a credible Catholic, what can we do, from your experience, Holy Father?
And his answer?
And his answer essentially was, be a courageous witness in everything you do. He talked about the early church, people like Saints Peter and Paul, who witnessed by shedding their blood on the soil of the city. And he said, like the Christians, the men and women of the beginnings of the church, so too we now, in this moment, must use every opportunity that we have to witness to the faith, to witness to what is in our hearts. And by that witness, not just in words, but especially in actions. That's the appropriate response to secularization.
There's been, I don't know if this came up, and maybe you can help me to understand. In the United States, over the course of the last year, there have been some grave challenges, right? These revelations of the treatment of abuse cases in different dioceses. Did that come up in your conversations? And if so, what was the Holy Father's response?
It didn't come up specifically. I wouldn't want to share everything that was transpired during the conversation, just out of confidentiality. But the Holy Father did acknowledge the fact that this is an extremely difficult moment, not just for us, but for the whole church, for lay people, for parish communities, for dioceses. And he encouraged us to be faithful to Christ and to be courageous in our ministry. And he used that word a number of times, to be courageous and to accept the challenge of this present moment and rise to it.
It's been really a difficult moment, I would think, for bishops in the United States in particular, as things have unfolded over the last year. Is this an opportunity for you to also touch base outside of the region that you're from, this New England region all these bishops are from, to just spend some time together and share experiences and ideas? How often do you get experiences like that back at home?
It really is a chance for that. Of all the bishops in the United States, these are the men that I know the best, even though I have only been a bishop for about 3 years. But we are often together at the meetings of the Conference of Bishops in Washington. We'll often meet regionally to discuss certain issues. And then once a year, all of us who are together here in Rome this week go on retreat together in the month of August. So I know these men, but I don't know them that well. And to share this experience together for a week, to pray with them at the tombs of the apostles, to share meals with them, to ride on the bus with them, to walk down the Via della Conciliazione to a meeting, and then ultimately to sit with the Holy Father and have a conversation, a heart-to-heart chat. It's been a great experience for me to learn better what it means to be a bishop, because if you think of it, you know, to enter into marriage, religious life, even the priesthood is something that you discern, but when you're named a bishop, it just happens. And so there's a process that I think you have to go through to learn what it means to be, to share in the fullness of the priesthood, to be a successor to the apostles. And so to spend this time with this group of men who have been doing this task, carrying this burden, much longer than I have, has been a great experience for me and has really encouraged me a lot.
Thank you so much, Bishop Robert Reed.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be with you.
Coming up, why church leaders in Texas are asking the governor to halt the planned execution of a death row inmate. A federal judge has overturned the Trump administration's conscience protection rule for healthcare workers. The measure was set to go into effect later this month. The protections would have allowed healthcare professionals to opt out of performing or helping in procedures they're morally opposed to, like abortions and gender transition surgeries. Joining me now with his thoughts is Michael New, Associate Scholar at the pro-life Charlotte Lozier Institute and Assistant Professor at the Catholic University of America. Michael, welcome back into the program. What's your reaction, first off, to this decision, and what do you think its impact is going to be on religious freedom?
I think it's disappointing. I think if you look at the country's history, we have a great history of protecting religious freedom. We allow Amish people to pull their students or children out of school at an earlier age. We exempt Mennonites and Amish from paying Social Security taxes. We tell Quakers they don't have to engage in combat. So we have a really good tradition. And I think this decision is very disappointing because it changes the relationship between kind of individuals and the state. For a long time, I think the government's tried to make reasonable accommodations for religious people. Now those of faith are being told to accommodate the state, and I think that's very concerning.
I'm sure that concern is shared by so many pro-lifers. We've reported on the University of Vermont Medical Center case in which a nurse was reportedly coerced in assisting with an abortion against her beliefs. How would have this rule by the HHS have helped with that sort of situation in terms of enforcement?
It would have been very helpful. I mean, the Trump administration in January of 2018 started a new office within HHS to specifically look at conscience rights and religious freedom rights. They felt the Obama administration wasn't really enforcing the rules the way they should have, so they started this new division. and they've gotten more complaints about conscience violations and religious freedom violations. So this rule would have actually helped this woman, given her some more recourse, and it's unfortunate this ruling is now in effect.
Opponents of the rule argued it was discriminatory to the healthcare needs of patients. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's pretty far-fetched. I mean, most conscience protection rules do have certain exemptions for people in like life-threatening situations. All this means is that those seeking health care might have to seek out another provider if they do run to one who has conscience concerns. I don't think it burdens people all that much as far as healthcare consumers go.
Like I say, this is just one rule in particular. Obviously, we're waiting to see whether the HHS will appeal this decision. What do you anticipate for the future?
I think that people who are concerned about conscience and religious freedom should be concerned. I don't know how this case will turn out, but I do think you have a Democratic Party that's increasingly secular and increasingly hostile to people of faith. And I think that the laws they pass, the judges they'll nominate, may not always protect conscience rights of people. So I think we should be very vigilant.
And vigilance is very important indeed. Okay, like I said, so many important issues here and ones that we'll continue to cover. Michael New, Associate Scholar at the Charlotte Lozier Institute and Assistant Professor at the Catholic University of America. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Catholic bishops in Texas are asking the governor to delay or cancel the scheduled execution of a death row inmate, Rodney Reed. They say there is evidence Reed is innocent.
In particular, I appealed to the Texas Board Pardons and Parole to be able to intervene and give a reprieve so that the whole body of evidence might be reviewed.
Bishop Joe Vasquez of the Diocese of Austin also says bishops in the Lone Star State are praying for the family of the victim in the 1996 murder. Reed is scheduled to be executed November 20th. He has maintained his innocence. Last year, Pope Francis reiterated the Church's opposition to the death penalty. Up next, are the faithful saying "I do" to Catholic moral teaching on cohabitation? We'll discuss. A new survey finds nearly 3/4 of Catholics in the United States are not opposed to couples cohabiting before marriage, despite the Church's moral teaching. According to data from the Pew Research Center, 74% of American Catholics say it's acceptable for an unmarried couple to live together. Pew also found more American adults are delaying marriage or forgoing it altogether. Joining me now by Skype from Charlottesville, Virginia is Brad Wilcox, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies. Brad is also the Director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. Brad, welcome back to the program. Are you surprised that such a large percentage of self-described Catholics in this survey say they're not opposed to cohabitation, despite that being contradictory to the Church teaching?
Yeah, I think a lot of Catholics have not heard anything about this issue from the pulpit or even in a youth group context. So, they just don't necessarily know what the Catholic Church thinks or teaches about this topic. So I'm not entirely surprised we see these kinds of attitudes among Catholics in the U.S.
So what do you think it is about our society, the day and time which we live, that's prompting this shift towards living together?
I think people want to maintain their freedom and flexibility to keep their options open when it comes to relationships. There's also a lot of folks who are afraid of getting divorced. So they see cohabitation as a good way to kind of keep their options open and not succumb to divorce, later on in life.
I also want to ask you, because you've studied the connection between marriage and happiness quite extensively. Tell me a little bit about that. What is the connection between marriage and happiness?
Well, we know that married Americans are more likely to report that they're happy, and sort of the happiness effect seems to be strongest for Americans in midlife, in their 30s, 40s, early 50s, when a lot of us are more likely to be facing difficulties and challenges. So on average, marriage gives us not just more meaning in life, but also more happiness. Of course, it's not always the case that it's doing that, but typically and on average it does.
Is there a difference between how generations view marriage and its importance?
Yeah, younger adults tend to think that cohabitation is roughly equivalent to marriage, and this new Pew survey also kind of gives us that sense from, the public at large as well.
Well, obviously this is a concern for many of the Church, like I said, because there are a lot of people who are self-described Catholics who might not know that about Church teaching. What are the future ramifications when it comes to raising families?
Well, I think the challenge is that, parents and other people in young adults' lives need to basically help them see how marriage is a much better way to order their lives, especially a much better way to raise children. And we know that even in this new Pew data, the people who are married are much more likely to report that they're faithful, that their partners act in their best interest, they tell the truth, and that they're essentially happier compared to those who are cohabiting. So it's still the case that in 2019, marriage is a better path. And we just need to do a better job of communicating that to our young adults, I think, today.
How do you think we could do that, Brad? Does this come down to the individual? Does it come down to priests who are preaching homilies? How can we get the word out? Because like I said, you studied this extensively, but a lot of people simply don't know these numbers.
Yeah, I think preaching is one part of the puzzle, but I think it's also about kind of teaching, middle school and high school students the facts of life, such as they are, about, cohabitation and marriage, and figuring out newer and innovative ways to bring the truth. It's all there in the social science to a young adult Catholic audience. There's a lot of stuff there that supports the church's teaching on these things, and most young adults are absolutely ignorant of this research, and they need to learn about it in a variety of different venues and contexts.
So important that we talk about it. Brad Wilcox, Senior Fellow at the Institute for Family Studies and Director of the National Marriage Project at the University of Virginia. Thanks so much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me on today.
Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, Edward Condon from Catholic News Agency explains how pastors should respond to a pro-abortion politician presenting themselves for communion.
It's really up to the pastor to discern the situation on the ground. The church places a lot of store in the relationship between a pastor and a member of his flock. So there is, in a sense, some pastoral discernment that needs to be exercised.
You can see more of the interview with guest host Dr. Grazie Christie tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for more airing times. It sounds like it will be an interesting discussion to listen to. And with that, we conclude our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.